The meeting of the UN Security Council No. 1938 is declared open. The preliminary agenda of this meeting is to maintain the peace and security of Ukraine. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, the President of Ukraine.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the UN Security Council, who respect and fulfill the UN Charter. Dear representatives of the states and leaders who are listening to me now. The UN Security Council is an institution that works for the well-known and defined rules for everyone, according to the regulations, which are still followed even by the representatives of Russia. They do not yet use weapons instead of words in this hall and do not knock out the chairs of those who sit next to them in the Security Council. But, probably, no one will be surprised if the hall of the UN Security Council is turned into a zone of violence by representatives of Russia. Russia is already flouting the UN Charter. Russia is already violating any rules of this world. It is only a matter of time when Russia will destroy this last international institution that can still function. I now call you to action. Anyone in the world can now name hundreds of examples of how Russia violates the international legal order and destroys the body of international law, constantly provokes escalation, constantly responds to any offers to talk with new brutality on the battlefield, even greater crises and threats to Ukraine and the world. And these things are obvious to everyone. I will now name only 5 situations that are happening right now. First, Russia ignored the IAEA's call to de-occupy the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and stop any hostile actions against Ukraine's nuclear facilities. This fact proves that Russia is deliberately keeping the world on the brink of a radiation disaster. Second, it is nuclear blackmail. Threats to use nuclear weapons are a constant narrative of Russian officials and propagandists. This proves that Russia has no right to possess nuclear weapons, as it is unable to guarantee the security of the world. It cannot ensure the safety of the world even against threats of using nuclear weapons. Third, last week I presented our peace formula at the UN General Assembly. Russia's response to this real path to peace was the announcement of mobilization, with Russia deliberately focusing mobilization on the indigenous peoples of the territories it controls. Russia controls not only the territories of the Caucasus or Siberia, where everything is done to mobilize as many men as possible from indigenous peoples. Russia also controls the Ukrainian Crimea, which it seized in 2014. Among all the ethnic groups of Crimea, it was the men of the indigenous people, the Crimean Tatars, who received the most Russian mobilization summons in proportion to the total population. This is a frankly genocidal policy. Fourth, in front of the whole world, Russia is conducting an outright farce called a referendum on the occupied territory of Ukraine. By threatening, people are forced to fill out some papers for a TV picture. The results of the pseudo-referendum were already invented in advance, just as the forced change of passports of the population of the occupied territories from Ukrainian to Russian was carried out in advance. And what is it for? And the answer is in the next point. Fifth, annexation of captured territories. The most brutal violation of the UN Charter is an attempt to steal the territories of other states. This is an attempt to erase the norms of international law. This is a very cynical attempt to force men in the occupied territories of Ukraine to mobilize into the Russian army in order to send them to fight against their own homeland. There is only one way to stop all this. First, Russia needs to be completely isolated in response to its actions. A state that is currently implementing a genocidal policy, keeps the world one step away from a radiation disaster and threatens a nuclear attack, cannot remain a permanent member of the UN Security Council with the right of veto. Russia should be excluded from all international organizations. If such exclusion is complicated by the procedure, Russia's participation in international organizations should be suspended. Second, new tough global sanctions against Russia are needed. Any annexation in the modern world is a crime against all states at the same time, for which the inviolability of borders is vitally important. Thirdly, any Russian criminal actions do not change anything for us. We do not succumb to blackmail. In Ukraine and in this war, we defend not only our independence and the right to life for our people, but also international law as a whole. Ukraine must receive all the necessary defense and financial assistance so that the aggressor loses. Fourthly, Ukraine should receive legally binding guarantees of collective security. Since the independence of our country is of such fundamental importance for many elements of the world's global security, an appropriate security system is also needed. And the fifth point. This is an important point. I want everyone to understand this. If Russia recognizes these pseudo-referendums as normal, legal, if it implements the so-called Crimean scenario, and if it makes another attempt to annex Ukrainian territory, it will mean that there is no point in talking about anything with this Russian president. Annexation is the step after which this president becomes against all humanity. Such a clear signal is now needed from every country in the world. I believe in your ability to act. I thank the French presidency for the opportunity to participate in this meeting. Thank you for attention. Glory to Ukraine.
I thank Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky for his speech.